Welcome to Stellar Sisters, the podcast where cosmic wisdom meets soul-enriching conversation.
We explore astrology, human design, and the unique blueprint of your soul, helping you understand yourself on a deeper level.
Consider this your permission slip to embrace the magic of being authentically you.
Let's begin.
Welcome back to Stellar Sisters podcast. We are your hosts, Chanel and Sydney. Welcome, Sid. How are you? So good to see you.
You too. We haven't done this in a while.
I know, it's been a minute just because of life, but today we are talking about JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette and their astrology, their synergy, their life, because we both watched Love Story on Hulu, I think it is, which, talked about their life, their romance, their meeting, their marriage, their death. And of course, like everything, we love to look into their astrology and their human design. And it was just so good. And we were like, we have to do a whole episode on this because there's just so many great examples, both from astrology and human design, about who they were and their life and their purpose and their connection, that we just thought it would be really interesting to talk about that. So I can't wait to get into it because it's so interesting. But before we go there, I know from our last podcast that we did with Chandler Marvin, who's a tarot reader, we talked about her house charming tarot offering, and you actually had one done, and we haven't talked about it, and I'm like dying to know how it went and like what she told you and what you ended up doing. So please share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was incredible. I knew it was going to be good, but it was like even better than I expected. I don't know. She just had so many good tips on what to do after reading the cards. And just like how human design and astrology, you get a reading and you kind of feel like that was, at least for me, my experience has been like, wow, that's so validating. I feel like maybe I already knew that, but it's like I'm remembering these things about myself. It's just like someone's literally telling you the truth of your soul. It's kind of the similar theme. Like she was pulling these cards and telling me what to do. And I'm like, yeah, like, of course, like I know that I should have done that before,
Yeah. But sometimes you just need to hear someone say it to you. Yeah.
Yeah. It just felt really good, comfortable. Like I already knew this, but it was just like a remembering of what I needed to do it. So I loved it because I love all readings of any kind in general. But what she did was first she pulls like an overall card, a couple cards for your house. And then
what was the question that you had, or what was the dilemma about your house?
So I just did my office because the dilemma has been like, where should I podcast? Like, which wall should I podcast on? Or which room in my house should I podcast on? I have this podium that wheels around. Ever since I messed up my back and leg, I got that so I could stand while we podcast. And I don't need it really per se anymore. Like I could sit down now, but I kind of like standing up while we do this now. So I've just continued to stand up. But that was kind of the main question. Like, is my office supportive for podcasting? And just, she kind of did a general reading for my whole office. Like, is there anything else we could change? What else is being supported? What's not being supported?
Because you didn't necessarily feel connected to it. It could be your office. Sometimes you did it in your bedroom. Sometimes you could do it in your guest bedroom, right? Yeah. It was just you weren't feeling like what was the best energy.
Yeah, exactly. But what she did was she pulled a couple cards from my house, and she pulled the 7 of Cups, and that one has like a literal pond at the bottom of it. And there's like a guy sitting like on a bench or a fence, kind of just laying there, like kind of meditating by the pond. And my backyard has a pond. And like, I love going back there and just listening to the water, like just, being relaxing. Yeah. So it was like so literal, like the cards she pulled just for my house energy in general. And then
Yes.
she pulled one card for my office, like overall, like what's the vibe? And she pulled the Queen of Pentacles. And I was like, whoa, like,
Oh,
yeah, it was like so validating. Like, this office is a good space for me to like make money and be good with resources and know like where to spend my money and invest and, you know, when to upgrade the podcast or whatever.
yeah.
Like that was the overall theme for my office. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. And that card also had like the Queen of Pentacles is sitting on a throne. And then behind her is like a forest. And my office literally has a forest out of the window, which I told her is like one of my favorite things about this office. You know, so like the imagery that was coming through was just so literal. And then for my actual like walls, like she pulled a card for all the walls, but I'm standing in a different place today.
Yeah, you have a
because
different background.
yeah. Um because overall for the podcasting, she pulled none of the walls like were really like this is where you should podcast, but she pulled a card specifically for like my podcast podium, like podcasting in general. And she pulled the moon. And she was just saying like it really doesn't matter. Like it's basically saying like use your intuition of where you feel like you should go. Like maybe sometimes you go by the window and maybe you get a comfy chair, like the Queen of Pentacles is sitting in a big chair, like get a comfy chair for the corner and maybe you podcast from the chair. And, you know, I don't know. So today I thought that the crystals behind me felt like a good vibe. So I'm trying that out today.
I love that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then like where I typically journal and just kind of check in with astrology and human design. Like I used to do that every day. I kind of stopped doing that. And that desk was over on a different wall. And I had my piano on the wall that the crystals are on. And the cards that she pulled like suggested to switch those two walls to kind of get like my intuition and emotional place flowing, like so I can kind of connect more like with my daily spiritual practice that I used to do. And then like I sell a piano class for a living, so that wall where we moved the piano to is kind of more supportive for that. And just some of the things she was suggesting, like I never would have thought of. I have an open closet in here that I hate. And I told her I want to just put like a curtain up. But she suggested putting like a whole curtain rod across the whole wall and then having like two curtains come down, like kind of draping the piano. And like that's something I would never have thought of. But I was like, whoa. And she was like, it would just because that card that she pulled was very like Venusian and kind of making that wall like beautiful and musical and hiding the crap in the
Wow.
closet at the same time. It was like, I was like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
I got like a plant. This room doesn't get a lot of light, so I have to have like shade plants. I mean, there's other things she suggested that I'm not going to get to right away, but just the few shifts that I did that we talked about have already like made it feel a lot better in here.
I love that. Incredible.
Yeah. So highly suggest doing that. She can do it for like a room or you can do it. I think she said she does it for like housewarming. So she'll pull, I don't think she'll do every single room for you. Like you have to book multiple house charmings for that if I'm correct. But I think you can get like a housewarming house charming. And I think she'll pull like one card for each room of the house just to like get a feel for each room.
Yeah.
Or you can like book it for like a specific question or room in the house or something that feels off. So it's just really cool. It's such an awesome offering.
That is so cool. Especially just to get that like outside perspective, because when you like live in your house every day, it's like the energy just can start to feel like stagnant, or you can just like get blocked in terms of like, you know, thinking about what would be best where. So to have that like outside perspective is like so helpful, I think.
Yes, it was so helpful. And I don't know. We'll see. I might do it for some other rooms in my house or buy it for my sister. She's going to be moving whenever she finds a house. Be a cool housewarming gift to buy somebody.
It's such a cool housewarming gift. I love
Yeah.
that. And I love that she pulled the moon for you. And it was just kind of like, go with how you feel that day, because it could be like one day you do it one in one area and the next time you do it in a different area.
Yeah. And like I was saying, how I felt so validated, like I think I had already thought that. Like maybe just try, see what you feel that day, you know? But it
Yeah.
kind of felt like, why? Like it should be more structured and you should do the same thing every time, you know?
Mm.
So when she said that, I was like, yeah, like I should be more flowy with it and just do what I feel like on that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool. I love that.
Yeah. It was awesome.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Shout out Chandler. She's just
Yeah.
such an amazing tarot reader. Again, I've had readings with her too, and she's the way that she reads the cards and the energy is just like
Yeah.
so special. She's really gifted.
She really is. And another thing she did, she has a camera that like points down at the cards. So you can see her face like up in the corner, but then the whole screen is the cards she's reading. And that was really helpful. I'm just such a visual person, but like you feel like you're in the room with her because you can see the exact layout of what she's doing and you can see all the imagery on the cards while she's talking. So I really appreciated that part too.
Yeah, that is so cool how she has that.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really cool.
Yeah. Can't recommend that enough. She was great.
Yeah. So if you're feeling called to a tarot reading, might we suggest Chandler? Check her out. So maybe let's talk about JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette.
Yes. And I just want to say before we get into them, the whole reason we're doing this episode, like Chanel said in the beginning, is because we watched Love Story and just loved the show. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it because it might give you some more context if you don't really know them well of what we're talking about. But that show is set mainly, well, it is set just through the 90s and it's just so nostalgic. And the sets and what they're wearing, the fashion, Carolyn works for Calvin Klein and everything's just black and beige and gray. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a vibe. And when I was watching it, you know, she's smoking like in every scene. And it just reminded me like people used to smoke everywhere. There used to be non-smoking sections of restaurants. Like that's wild that we lived through that. I remember when it was like in the newspaper, my mom was reading it like they're going to start having completely non-smoking restaurants. And I was like, yes, because I always hated the smell. But it's just so funny. Like there's scenes where she's smoking in the office, like just blowing it out of a window, you know, like that would just not be allowed today. And like the no cell phones or laptops, you know, people just had TVs or like an old bulky computer maybe in their house or just at the office. And it was just such simpler times. And like just watching it for that was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that it came back, like their story came back around again at this time because JFK Jr. and Carolyn got married the last time Saturn was in Aries, and Saturn just returned to Aries. So it's like the Saturn return of their wedding and of their relationship. And of course, it makes sense that their story would resurface again at the time of the Saturn return of their wedding. And I know we've talked about that before, like with Sarah McLachlan and what was the tour called? Why is it escaping me now?
Lilith?
Yeah, the Lilith Fair. That was another like Saturn return moment that started with Saturn and Aries, and then the documentary came out again now that Saturn's back in Aries. I think it just really speaks to the Saturn cycles. Everything in time is a cycle, and you know, things come back, especially with the Saturn return. It's like with the Saturn return, it feels like there's been enough time for it to really be like nostalgic and like to revisit it again. So I just, of course, the timing of it is just really interesting that they're kind of back in the cultural zeitgeist again, because it's a cycle and it's time for like us to revisit that moment again.
I love that. And the music in the show is like all 90s songs, just so good.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we're a little bit late to this podcast because like this show came out like several months ago. But I think it's still like super interesting and
yeah.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about JFK Jr.'s chart and just Carolyn's chart separately, because I think that their just natal birth charts are really, really interesting. First, I'll put JFK Jr.'s chart on the screen. Can you see it? Okay, perfect. So I'm not going to talk about everything, but just I'm going to talk about some of the things that really stand out to me. And so what immediately stood out to me about JFK Jr.'s chart, first of all, he's a Sagittarius sun, Virgo rising, and Aquarius moon. And the first thing that really stood out to me was his Sagittarius sun is in the fourth house. And the sun represents your identity, your vitality, where you shine, where you kind of are meant to be seen and take up space. And his is in the fourth house, which is the house of home and family. And so obviously he is the son of a previous president, a president that was beloved and, famously assassinated and broke the hearts of the nation. And, he was just a child, a toddler when his father was assassinated. And, he was born into it's like the royal family of America, right? The Kennedy family. And so I just think this really speaks to his identity is so tied into his family. Like who he is really sometimes, a lot of the times in his life, overshadowed by his family and his legacy and, where he comes from. And in the show, even it really talks about how kind of influential his mother was to his life and especially his love life. Like she kind of like made decisions for him about who he should date or who he should marry. And I just think a large part of who he was really overshadowed by his family and where he came from. And that can be really represented by the sun in the fourth house. Because a lot of the times he lived in the shadow of his father and his family legacy. I just think that was really interesting about his chart. The second thing I noticed is that as a Virgo rising, Mercury is his chart ruler. And also he has his midheaven, which is the point that represents career and public life and public image, is in Gemini, which means Mercury also rules his career. So it rules his identity and his career. And he has Mercury in Scorpio in the third house. And the third house is the house of writing, communication, speaking, publishing, media. And he famously started his magazine, George, and he deliberately chose not to go into politics to start this magazine. And what's interesting about his Mercury is that it is conjunct Neptune, they're both in Scorpio. And so they're just very different. Like Mercury is about facts and information, and Neptune is about art and this collective image and collective ideals and imagination. And the magazine was really a mix of those two because it was about politics, but it was also about politics as the collective culture and image and ideals and perception. And it was much more than just Mercury alone, much more than just like the facts and the politics and the mundane about that. He really tied in kind of this collective ideal about it, and the magazine was a mix of politics and pop culture. And I just thought that was such a great representation of Mercury and Neptune. And honestly, the magazine faced a lot of backlash for being more pop culture focused than just strictly politics. But I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. The fact that he's both ruled, like his rising sign and his career line are both ruled by Mercury, and just having the magazine and who he was and how he talked to people, like it's just so supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then just going into some of his human design, He's a 4-6 emotional manifesting generator. And him being a 4-6, the 4 is good in intimate relationships. They're a good networker. They're good with people one-on-one. And then the 6 is really good with groups and the collective and teaching and kind of being removed from people, but still guiding people. But him being a 4-6, they kind of touch on how he'll maybe go into politics or maybe run for Senate at the end of the show. And I just wonder if he was still alive today, if he would have gone into politics, because I think he would have been a really great politician in some way, or even president.
Yeah, just because of his personality, just because of that
Yeah.
4 line, meaning like he makes everyone feel like warm. He makes everyone feel like he's connecting with you individually. But with the 6 line, it's like, but he also has such a huge collective impact.
Exactly. Yeah. And on top of that, he has the channel of charisma and he has the channel of intimacy. And that channel of intimacy is kind of the same energy of having that 4 line and making people feel warm and comfortable and like they're comfortable talking to you and they don't even really know you. And that's the same energy with the channel of intimacy. It's like, well, I'm going to tell you all of this stuff, like my deepest, darkest secrets. Like you're like my therapist right now. And I don't even know why I'm saying all this word vomit to you, but you just feel good. So I'm going to talk to you.
Yeah.
It's like this natural energy, like pulls people in. People want to be close to you. And then that channel of charisma, just a natural talker and good with people and able to communicate with people. And he had a good relationship with the paparazzi and kind of enjoyed it. It seemed like, he was okay with it. And I know he was born into a family where he was in the spotlight for his whole life, so he was used to it. But his human design chart just supports it so well for him to be able to step into that. And if you I haven't really gone so deep into his sister's chart, but she doesn't have the same energetics as him. She was kind of much more removed, didn't really like being in the spotlight, but like it just supports him so well. He was just kind of designed for that role that he was born into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now you can go into Carolyn.
Yes, like so spot on with him. Yeah, and then we can look at Carolyn's chart. And so Carolyn is a Capricorn sun, Aquarius rising, and Cancer moon. And what really strikes me most about her chart is how Saturnian she is. So she's a Capricorn sun, Aquarius rising, which are both ruled by Saturn. And Carolyn is most famous for her minimalist style, which is very Saturnian. Saturn is about boundaries, about restriction, and Carolyn's style was very restricted and very minimalist. I mean, she barely wore any jewelry. Like, she did not accessorize. Everything was very minimalist and basic and stripped down. She didn't wear bold colors. She didn't accessorize. It was just so Saturnian. And I just think that's so interesting with like her legacy of kind of being this minimalist style icon. And her natal Saturn, which is her chart ruler and the ruler of her sun, is in the 2nd house, which is the house of material possessions and like physical goods. And she worked in fashion, so she did work with physical things. And also, I think her identity was in a large part wrapped up in her work and her ability to like earn money for herself. I think that was a big part of who she was and her identity. And her natal sun is in Capricorn in the 12th house. And the 12th house is a house that's very hidden. It is like, with your sun, that's where you shine. And with your sun being in the 12th house, it's kind of like, oh, I don't necessarily like to be out in the spotlight. I'd rather be behind the scenes. I'd rather be, I don't want to be the one that is seen. I don't want to be the center of attention. Someone who really appreciates privacy. And that was very much who she was. What is interesting to me is that Carolyn's 7th house, which the 7th house represents her marriage and her partner is ruled by Leo. And so this kind of is interesting because while she's an Aquarius rising and a Capricorn sun, she will attract, and her marriage partner will be someone who is very much like seen and in the public eye, which was JFK Jr. And the ruler of her seventh house is the sun, which her sun is in the 12th house. And so there's some connection there between the seventh house of marriage and the 12th house of seclusion, and potentially mental health struggles as well. And I think it was really evident that, especially after they got married, Carolyn became extremely reclusive, and they were bombarded by the paparazzi, and she really couldn't go anywhere or do anything. And that really forced her to stay in the house and, really fed into this like really more reclusive lifestyle, and also was very detrimental to her own mental health. And so I just thought that link was really interesting in her chart too.
That's fascinating because in human design, she's a 2-4. And the 2 line is the hermit, and if you have the two profile numbers, but you can sometimes sway one way into one of the numbers and not really be leaning into the other one. So that also stood out for me because it was such a good example of her like really leaning into the 2 line and really like being totally fine. Like 2 lines are fine being in their house by themselves, not around people, just hermiting and doing their own thing. But for her, she's a 2-4 sacral manifesting generator. So they're both manifesting generators, but she has sacral authority and he has emotional authority. And she also has the channel of charisma. And she was pretty likable, I think, until maybe they got married and people were just like hating on her because she didn't want to be in the public eye. But in the show, when she's meeting his friends for the first time, you can see, and I know it's an actor playing her as a person, but you can see how she was a charismatic person, how she interacts with people at work and how she interacts with John and how she interacts with his friends, and you can feel her being more of a private person with that 2 line and really leaning into that. But then when she's around more like people she feels comfortable with and has more of a connection with them and gets to know them better, that's when she kind of starts to open up and be able to have good conversations and be more of like that intimate friend and have good one-on-one relationships as that 4 line. But you can feel that channel of charisma come out, but it's just so interesting to kind of compare the two, as him being like a 4-6 and her being a 2-4 with that same channel. You can feel that charisma, but it's much more removed and hidden for Carolyn. And as her being a 2-4, you typically resonate with the first number. Like you as an individual will resonate with the first number more than you will with the second. And 2-4s often feel like, I don't want to be around anybody, even though they have that 4 line. People are like, but you're so good with people and you're outgoing and you're easy to talk to. But the 2-4 is like, no, like every social interaction is so hard for me. Like, I just want to be in my house. So she's like such a good example of that. And the 2 is also a natural. And I feel like she was so natural at what she did in fashion, especially in the first couple of episodes. They kind of just show her kind of starting to take the reins, and Calvin Klein is like, yeah, like let her do X, Y, and Z thing. Like she's really, really good at this. We need her stepping up. And how she picked Kate Moss to be a model, and then, right, wasn't it Kate Moss?
Yes.
And then she became this sensation. I don't know if that's a true story, but they put that into the show. Like Carolyn kind of picked her out of a headshot, and then she became this huge sensation after being a model for Calvin Klein.
Mm-hmm.
And just last thing I want to say about them as individuals is Carolyn has single definition in human design. So that means all of the centers are talking to each other. People with single definition are really quick to process things, and they're totally fine being alone. They're okay being at home by themselves for a couple days, a week. Like they don't need to be around other people. So her being a 2-4 plus single definition, like she's totally fine being on her own. She's cool with maybe being around her significant other or a couple intimate friends, but she doesn't need to be in the spotlight. She doesn't need to be around tons of people. On JFK, this is so fascinating. This is probably the most fascinating thing. He's triple split definition. This is much more rare. I think that it's about like 11% of people have triple split. And that means that there's 3 places in your human design chart where centers are connected, but then they're not talking to each other. So it's helpful for people with triple split to be around multiple different auras so they can feel a bridge to that split. So someone's like creating a connection to the other centers in their chart. And so it's so helpful for him to be out and about. And if he's with one person for too long, it can kind of feel like he's trapped. So he needs to be around a lot of different people in different situations. And you can just see that come through. So
Yeah.
I think that's so fascinating.
It's extremely fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. It just like perfectly explains who both of these people were and how they operated.
Yeah.
Because of course it does, right? And then there were just a couple of things that like really stood out to me about their synastry together. So first of all, Carolyn's natal Saturn, which is right here. So now I have JFK Jr.'s chart and Carolyn's chart on the screen if you are watching on YouTube. And so JFK Jr.'s chart is this inner wheel and Carolyn's chart is this outer wheel. And you can see Carolyn's natal Saturn, which is in Pisces, is in JFK Jr.'s 7th house of marriage. And so this Saturn is actually a really key planet in synastry. You might think Saturn would represent like difficulty or struggle, but it actually represents long-term commitment and long-term, like a relationship that can last. So if there's not Saturn aspects in a relationship, it might be that you are just like attracted to each other for a short amount of time, but it's not a relationship that's meant to like last the long haul. And so when JFK Jr. meets Carolyn, who has Saturn in Pisces in his 7th house, it's like, oh, this relationship feels real. It feels substantial. It feels like something that can last a really long time. It's a very serious transit. And it's also conjunct his south node, which makes me feel like there is some sort of like comfort there with Carolyn. Like you are familiar, you are comfortable, you feel like home to me. Sometimes people think of like south node connections as like past life connections, is like really strong soul ties. And so I just think that is really interesting.
Wait a second. I have to add to that.
Yeah.
So, like I was just talking about single definition versus triple split definition, JFK needs someone who can bridge his gaps, right? Like someone who can connect something up to another set of centers that is standing on its own. And he has an undefined G center. So like his identity and like where he's going in life. Carolyn has a defined G. So him being around her is going to make him feel much more comfortable and like clear and focused and like having a knowing of like, where am I going? What am I supposed to be doing? What's my purpose? So her being with him really sparks that for him, and it connects. It doesn't connect everything for him, but it does bridge a big split for him. And it's just a beautiful channel that she's helping him connect up to, because then it's giving him access to his intuition as well. And it connects his emotional center. So they're all talking to each other. And the throat center then connects to his G center. So he's able to communicate like where he wants to go in life when he's around her better.
Wow.
So yeah, fascinating.
So interesting. So interesting. And then not only do they have that Saturn connection, but also JFK Jr.'s natal Saturn is at 15 degrees of Capricorn and Carolyn's sun is at 16 degrees of Capricorn. So they have another Saturn connection with JFK Jr.'s Saturn being directly conjunct Carolyn's sun.
Wow.
So this is also representative of like, okay, when they meet and their energies come together, it's like serious. It is long term. It is like they're in it for the long haul together. And actually, my partner and I have this exact, not not actually, I shouldn't say exact, but have this combination too, where my Saturn is directly conjunct his natal moon. And
Oh,
so, and we've been together for 12 years at this point. So it was like, yeah, when we met, it's like, oh, this is different. Like, this isn't just like a fling. This is serious and this is long term. And so they have both of that Saturn connection, which I think is super interesting. And not only does JFK Jr. have Saturn in Capricorn, but he also has Venus and Jupiter there, which makes the Saturn feel much more harmonious than harsh, because sometimes Saturn planets can feel like difficult or challenging or like a grind, but he has two of the benefics that are also in Capricorn, Venus and Jupiter. So it feels like very harmonious. There's a lot of like support and love and connection and growth and opportunity there as well. And so with Carolyn being a Capricorn sun, like she feels really supported by his Capricorn placements too.
wow. You know what? I don't know if this is a stretch, but just you talking about the Saturn kind of being harsh and then the Venus, Jupiter being there, it kind of just represents to me almost his childhood in a way. Like he did have a beautiful childhood with his mom and all of these opportunities presented to him with Venus and Jupiter there,
Yeah.
together. But then Saturn's kind of like, well, your dad got assassinated when you were a toddler, you know.
Yeah.
But maybe that would
Yeah.
be more representative if it was in the fourth house. I don't know.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because he has Saturn, which is the most difficult planet in his chart, co-present with Venus, which is the most positive planet in his chart. So it's um, kind of like this mix of like the best things in your life are also come along with the worst things in your life.
Yeah.
It can bring in like both of that dynamic, which I think really kind of sums up his life in general. Like that,
Yeah.
he had so much fame and notoriety, which on one hand was a good thing, and I think he liked that and enjoyed it, but it also brought about some of the darkest, hardest moments of his life as well. And so it's like, how do you cope with that? How do you like integrate those two things? And that's really challenging. That's like,
Hmm.
you know, when the best thing in your life comes along with also the worst thing in your life, you know?
Yeah. Yes. Constant, lifelong journey to go on with that.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, what I also think is interesting about their charts, so now I have Carolyn's chart on the inner wheel and JFK's chart on the outer wheel, is that you can see Carolyn's midheaven, which is the degree in her chart that represents career and public life, is at 1 degree of Sagittarius, and JFK Jr.'s sun is at 2 degrees of Sagittarius. So you can see that his presence in her life really illuminated like her public life and her career and brought a lot of attention to her. I think you can see that JFK Jr.'s Uranus was in Leo, which is in Carolyn's seventh house. So, when she met him, like her seventh house of long term partnership was like completely flipped upside down because, at least in the show, I actually don't know if this is true about her in real life, but she kind of had like maybe very like superficial like romantic relationships, like kind of kept her distance with romantic relationships until really she met John.
Yeah.
And he really changed her whole dynamic around marriage and long-term partnership. I mean, she wasn't even sure if she wanted to like be with him, and she initially rejected his like marriage proposal.
Yeah.
And so like he really, that Uranus is about transformation and change, um and he really kind of like totally flipped her idea of like long-term partnership and marriage on its head, and she ended up marrying him, you know, and that was a really radical change from how she approached relationships in the past.
Yeah, wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and then there's just the one of the last things is, you know, Carolyn is obviously an Aquarius rising. She also has Mars and Venus in Aquarius. Um, and I think this is interesting because Venus is the planet of connection and Mars is the planet of, you know, individuality. And so having those two planets conjunct is like connection comes with the ability for Carolyn, you know, connection comes with the ability to maintain your sense of self. Connection comes with the ability to, you know, attend to your own desires in the context of relationships. Um, you know, a Venus that's conjunct Mars is a Venus that isn't going to like be quick to fall into enmeshment with another person. It's like, I'm going to be in a relationship with you, but I'm also going to maintain my sense of individuality,
Hmm.
especially in Aquarius, which is like a planet that needs a lot of, or a sign that needs a lot of its own space inherently. It's Saturn ruled, you know, it likes its boundaries. It's like not a sign that's like mushy gushy connection kind of, it's very, you know, intellectual and needs space. And so I think that's interesting about Carolyn. And, you know, but John has his moon in Aquarius too, which I think is a connection point for them. Um, you know, both having that Aquarius energy, they can just understand each other and connect on that level. Um, so, yeah, I thought that was very interesting as well.
Hmm. I love that.
Um, so, that was some things with their synastry that really stuck out to me. We can really take a look at, I think, their wedding date, because that is super interesting. So maybe I'll put JFK Jr.'s chart on the screen as the inner wheel, and I will put their wedding date as the outer wheel. Okay, so this is kind of like super interesting to me. So like I said earlier, they got married when Saturn was in Aries. It had just entered Aries a few months prior, but really during like their courtship and when they got married, Saturn was transiting through Pisces, which was JFK Jr.'s seventh house of marriage and relationships. So really through that whole time, he was getting very, very serious about relationships and wanting to commit. When he met Carolyn, it really changed his whole perspective around marriage and relationships because obviously he was like the world's most eligible bachelor. And so when that Saturn transit went through his seventh house, he got serious about really wanting to settle down and get married.
Of
Uh,
course he did.
yes. What I think is the most interesting thing about their wedding date is that JFK's natal sun is at 2 degrees of Sagittarius, and on their wedding date, Pluto had just moved into Sagittarius. So it was at 0 degrees of Sagittarius for their wedding.
Mm.
And this is just huge. This splits his life up into like two distinct sections, you know,
Yeah.
pre wedding and post wedding. And obviously, I know that that is true for a lot of people when they get married, right? But like this represented for him specifically this huge identity shift in his life with Pluto there. You know, Pluto strips you down of like any kind of like false identity, false sense of self that maybe you previously were clinging to. And then when Pluto comes in, it's like it's going to strip you down. What really matters? Who are you really? It's going to tear down any structures, any beliefs in your life that, you know, you've clung to as a sense of identity up until that point, and really completely like rearrange that for you. And I think it's really interesting that it's happening also in his fourth house of home and family. because, like I was saying, with his son there, his identity was so wrapped up in his family and where he came from. And I think his marriage really kind of like kicked off this point of like, okay, who are you now as an individual? And like, what matters to you now? Because you have this new life now. That makes sense. It's just like so profound, such a deep, huge,
Yes.
like mental, emotional transformation that he was going through at this time.
Yeah. I mean, of course, this is happening in his fourth house, and how, like you said, how much his identity is tied to his family and who he is and what he's supposed to do, and everybody having a say and opinion of what he's doing in his family. And I wonder what Jackie would have said if she was still alive, when they got married. If she would
Yeah.
have loved Carolyn or really pushed her away. And if she didn't like her, would he have married her?
Yes, I know. And just their wedding was so unconventional. Like it wasn't your traditional Kennedy wedding. And, he was really allowing Carolyn to do what she wanted in terms of the wedding rather than like honor his family's wishes. He was really putting his wife first instead of his family. And so I feel like that was a like first step for him of separating himself and individuating himself from his family
Hmm.
was his wedding, which is exactly Pluto on the sun in the fourth house.
And that wedding feels so much like a 2-4 person, like
Yes,
this,
yes, it
like,
does.
like hermity, intimate friend place.
Yes, you're so
Yeah.
right.
And I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but it's beautiful that he has Jupiter in the fifth house and the moon transiting the fifth house during their marriage. How beautiful is that?
Exactly. Yes. So this was JFK's Jupiter return.
My gosh, yeah.
Yeah, because he has natal Jupiter in Capricorn. And so Jupiter was returning to Capricorn in the fifth house um, on their wedding. The fifth house is the house of love and romance. So it would make sense that Jupiter would be in the fifth when he got married. Really kind of like um, emphasizing the positive, romantic um, time in his life that represented like his wedding and his life with his wife. But also, it's significant because he's having his Jupiter return, and Jupiter rules his seventh house because the seventh house is in Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter. So, the Jupiter returns would be really significant times for him in his life when it comes to his relationships.
This
Um,
is such a good example.
yeah, it is
Ugh.
such a good example. And, Carolyn was also a Capricorn sun. So Jupiter, coming and transiting in her sign would represent a very positive time in her life as well. Um, and then what I also think is really interesting is for Carolyn in her chart, 1996 was a huge year because it seems like Pluto just moved into Sagittarius, and then Uranus just moved into
Mm.
Aquarius, which is actually very interesting because it's very similar to 2026 where Pluto just recently moved into Aquarius and Uranus just also moved into Gemini. So it was kind of like a year that represented like major collective changes. So that year, 1996, Uranus just moved into Aquarius. And Carolyn being an Aquarius rising, this was a huge shift for her. And so Uranus, again, is the planet that represents like change and revolution and rebellion. And so when Uranus enters your first house, it's a radical change of identity. And for this to happen right when they got married is significant because obviously her life completely changed in the blink of an eye after they got married. She was already like famous and known when they were dating, but when they got married, that marked a time when she became probably like one of the most famous women, definitely in America, probably in the world.
Yeah.
And that just represents that Uranus transit to the first house of identity. And what a radical, huge like transformation and change that was for her, to be kind of like thrust into the spotlight, to not being able to leave your house, to being followed by the paparazzi. Like it just really represents such a radical identity shift for her. Not only was she now married, she was now the most famous woman in the world, and like couldn't leave her house and was constantly being photographed. And yeah, I just think the astrology of that is so on the nose. Then when we come to their death, that happened July 16th, 1999. Obviously, they died in a plane crash when JFK Jr. was piloting the plane. Um, and so this was just a couple of years after their wedding. So Uranus was still in Aquarius. And you can see that Uranus and the South Node is transiting through Carolyn's house, or Carolyn's first house, you know, hitting her ascendant, her Mars, her Venus. You know, this transit doesn't necessarily like always mean death, you know, but it just kind of represents like there was a major unexpected event happening in her life. And that's pretty significant. And for JFK Jr., you just pointed this out, Sid, on the day that they died, that Pluto had moved to 8 degrees of Sagittarius, which was pretty much conjunct his IC, which represents his like home and family and the most personal private part of his chart. So you know, their death date, there was pretty significant things like happening in both of their charts. Um, and it's just so untimely and unfortunate that they passed away so young. Yeah, it was just such a tragedy. But yeah, that's what I have really for their astrology. I just thought it was so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And really great examples of astrology and human design in action.
Yeah, such good examples. And I just have one more thing I want to add for the human design piece is kind of like a deeper relationship, partnership thing that you can look at with connection with them. But if you look at the line expression of your unconscious moon in human design, it kind of tells you what you're attracting in relationship, like what type of relationship you're drawn to in your life. And it can tell you the karmic patterns you're here to work through. And they both have their unconscious moon is, you know, whatever the gate is, you then read point, whatever the number, they both have 3. So the moon is transiting through 3-line expression for both of their unconscious moons. And they're both wanting to attract the same thing out of a partnership, basically. And this is just so relevant in their public fights that they had, like just them as a couple, what this means, having the moon in the line 3 expression. The highest expression is like wanting adventure in a relationship and playfulness. And then the low expression is kind of looking for drama and being drawn towards unstable relationships. And you can see that with both of them through their previous relationships, but then with each other. Like when they're together, they are really playful and adventurous and kind of looking for that and liking to kind of do those things together. But then, kind of when they're both in the low expression, it's like they're having these public fights and, you know,
Yeah.
being very dramatic with each other, and like him leaving to go stay in a hotel and not being able to like kind of talk through their feelings together. You know, it's like the extremes of coming together and like having this light, playful energy and then almost wanting that drama so then we can be playful again together. So when I saw that they had the same expression there, it was
That's so
just
interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is so interesting.
Yeah. So that's like there's so many other things I could talk about with their charts, but those are kind of the main things I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. It's just so interesting how I believe that these things are fated And I think that astrology proves, in my opinion, how like things are fated and the people in our lives are fated. And, you know, it's just so interesting how they came together. I also think it's so interesting that JFK Jr. was drawn to someone who like didn't want to be in the spotlight, who didn't want to be married, who didn't, you know, like she really married him because she loved him, I think, not because
Yeah.
of who he was, you
Yeah.
know, and like she didn't really have a choice in that. It was like, I'm in love with this person. And even though he kind of represents a lifestyle that I don't really want, for some reason, like I feel like I have to marry this person, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And same thing for him. A big part of why he was attracted to her is because she was so different than like anyone else that he had like dated or been with, I think.
Yeah. And she didn't want to be with him for the fame. You know,
Right.
other women were like kind of feeding off that and like, let's be famous together, you know? And she was like, I don't want any part of that. Like, that's your thing. You can be in the spotlight. I'm totally cool just being at home. You know, go do your thing. I'm good being here, but I will support you, you
Right.
know?
But that was the thing that attracted them and also the thing that made them fall apart,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And there's something to that. And I think we are attracted to people who exactly push the wounds that we have to kind of like help us heal in those areas. I'm
Yeah,
a big
for
believer
sure.
in that.
Yeah, and they're also a good example of like being attracted to each other because they have some things in common, some things that feel really familiar. And you know, it's just like, okay, you get me because you have the same channel and the same, you know, they have some of the similar gates. But then they are very different, you know, and they are attracted to kind of pushing the person that's pushing the wound on them, you know,
Hmm.
and helping them
Hmm.
grow in some way. It would have been really cool to be able to see how their relationship evolved. You know, would they have stayed together because they were on kind of rocky grounds?
I know.
What would have happened? Where would her life have gone career wise with like social media coming up? Like what would their Instagrams look like today, you know?
I know, right?
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah, where would George be?
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. They're just like such a fascinating couple.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. And yeah, if you would like a deep dive into your chart, you can book a reading with either myself or Sydney. Um, please rate and review the podcast if you enjoyed it. And yeah, let us know what you think, or if you found anything that stuck out to you about their astrology or human design. We'd love to hear it. Thanks so
Thanks. See you
much.
later.
Bye
Bye.
bye.